Hello everyone, we're going to go ahead and get started. Can you hear me? Mic on? Okay, great. So I'm Bella Gerlich, I'm Dean of Libraries, and it is my honor to welcome everyone to the 5th annual Sowell Conference. I've worked at a number of universities, and I have to say this is one of the very best conferences I've seen of this type out on campus. And it's the quality work from the students, the great researchers and writers that we have here is just fabulous. So I also want to thank Dr. Warner and all the staff and librarians who made this possible and put this on. And with further ado, I'm going to Dr. Lawrence Dubank, our provost, to provide some welcome remarks.
Thank you. Is that on? Yeah, I guess it is. Thank you, Dean Gerlich. My comments today won't be particularly substantive, but I want to be here to express a sentiment. First, to thank Dean Gerlich for giving me the opportunity at least to address this conference, something I've never done before, but also to express my appreciation for what this really means in terms of the broader scope of things happening at Texas Tech. The Southwest Collection and Special Collections Library, the Sowell Collection in particular, are extraordinary resources that are unique to Texas Tech. And I think it's wonderful that students are involved in this conference. That's an attribute of Texas Tech that we're really proud of, that we engage students in these sort of signature learning experiences, and this is one of them. It's really a world-class resource on the natural world, and Texas Tech is very fortunate that we house the works of some of the most prominent authors in this genre, like Harry Lopez, a good friend who's here today. But the Southwest Collection and Special Collections Library, along with our museum and the National Ranching Heritage Center, represent unique assets of Texas Tech that provide sort of special opportunities to bring together interdisciplinary research, the creative process, and address issues of real importance to the world that are also unique to this area. And it's something we need to capitalize on. And there's a lot going on right now that recognizes the importance of that. Dean Gerlich is very involved with bringing to Texas Tech the archival works of Terry and Joe Harvey Allen. They'll have a presence in this facility, and they will complement things and research activities that are going on at the Museum and National Ranching Heritage Center, as well as research that takes place in academic departments. So there's also discussion right now of expanding the facilities of the museum that would provide sort of a unique opportunity to bring together all of these different issues related to the special geography, the climate, the resources of this area, the creative process, and the research going on at Texas Tech. Those concepts seem a bit vague, and I think if you stay here and you persist, you'll know what we're talking about. And in a way, it's a bit ironic because Texas Tech was a regional university for many years. And now you're probably aware that the Carnegie Foundation for Higher Education reclassified us among the doctoral institutions in the highest research activity category, along with 114 other very prominent universities. But I see it somewhat odd, maybe, that Tech's ability to increase its stature depends on capitalizing on those resources that are somewhat unique to this area. And those resources are presented through things like the Sowell Collection, our museum, and the library. So what you're doing is very important to Tech's ambition to enhance its stature as a great national research university and to capitalize on those unique assets in this area. So as incoherent as that may have seemed. I want to convey that you're doing important work. You're doing important work because of the content with which you're dealing and the people who are presenting it. Thank you, Bella, for facilitating this. Thank you, Barry, for being a part of this for many years.
Okay, we'll move to the next portion. I'm getting to introduce today, this is our undergrad group, the honors class. They are in Environment and the Humanities, 3306, working with Professor Caswell and Diane Warner in our collections. That class is writing in the archives. I'm a librarian here at the archives as well. So today we have, let's see if I get it right, Emma, Aaron, and Catherine are joining us today. And let's see, what am I forgetting? They've been working this semester here in the Sowell collection, so their papers are coming from the research they've been doing in that class, that's 3306. So Catherine's going to talk to us about Life of Service. That's a study of Barry Lopez's relationship with his readers. And then Aaron Carver will talk about inside considerations of Barry Lopez's outside, his work outside. And Emma Barnes is cheapening a sense of place, how Barry Lopez doesn't do it. So,
Will you tell us who you are?
yes, Rob King, I'm here with the Southwest Collection. I work in technical processing. So glad to introduce them today, and I will let you all carry the show.
My name is Catherine Lundberg. I'm a senior in civil engineering. My title is A Life of Service, a study of Barry Lopez's relationship with his readers. Conversations with Barry Lopez by William E. Tiedemann is a series of interviews between Tiedemann and his friend and colleague Barry Lopez. In the interviews, they discuss different aspects of Lopez's writing, including his motivation to write to help his readers. Lopez tells him that what makes, quote, an authentic story is establishing a moral relationship with the reader. The reader believes that you can be trusted, unquote. It is a writer's responsibility to tell a story that highlights a pattern or an experience so a reader can learn from it. Authenticity can be reinforced by remembering that a story is the authority instead of the writer. The relationship between a writer and a reader begins with the writer's intentions for writing the story, way before the reader ever opens their book. When a writer assumes they have authority, they are robbing the reader of the value that is within the story. Lopez's perspectives on authenticity and authority are ways he is vigilant about his writing. He is attentive in his work to serve culture, communities, and readers. Writing is an outlet for Barry Lopez to live a life of service, to have an avenue to help other people. The short story Impera's Tapestry in Lopez's book Outside is a good example of how Lopez tries to have the story as the authority, and not mistake that he has authority as a writer. A woman named Impera weaves a vibrant and intricate tapestry of the Grand Canyon during her last year before cancer takes her life. Within the image formed by the tapestry, she weaves the words, quote, my holy and blooded desire. Implausible as such a life can be, his hands tracing the bow of my back, his lips on the rim of my ear, bring my own children here to what I was given, unquote. These are the words she wrote the morning after she was married. Of all the memories Impera could have shared with her friend in the story or thought about for hours while creating the tapestry, she chooses to recreate the image that she remembered vividly from her childhood. Quote, I never forgot its breadth, how delicate the colors of the rocks and the sky and the trees were that hung in it. I wanted to fill that space up, to be inside it like a bird, graceful, rising, falling, flying long winding spirals from the rim to a landing far below. Impera encounters the landscape when she was a child in the Grand Canyon with her parents and brothers. The intimate details about Impera's time at the Grand Canyon allow me to visualize her experience. Lopez's description of the place goes beyond observing. He explains how the character interacts with the landscape through her wanting to be like a bird, to fill the space, instead of simply describing what she sees. When I read Impera's Tapestry, I was able to feel Impera's emotional connection with the landscape. I felt like I was a part of the story instead of a spectator. Lopez offers a story and doesn't tell the reader how to interpret it, which lets me follow and peer through the last parts of her life. Lopez mentions writing about his sexual abuse to Tiedemann in an interview and conversations with Barry Lopez. The interview led me to read Lopez's essay published in 2013, Sliver of Sky. It is an essay recounting the sexual abuse he went through as a child. Why did he decide to write the story after years of struggling with addressing these memories? He found himself connected to too many other people that were abused as children. In the essay, Lopez describes the struggles that many other victims go through with their sexual identity. He was, quote, haunted by a sense of contamination, a feeling that he had been rendered worthless as a man because of what he had done, unquote. In an NPR interview with Terry Gross on the talk show Fresh Air, Lopez explains why he wanted to write about such a traumatic time in his life. He said that he had become impatient by newspaper articles suggesting that what victims, quote, were most interested in was winning a financial judgment more than punishing. He thought that what you would really want is for somebody to believe what happened, to take you at face value and not to manipulate you in a courtroom, unquote. The time after the abuse is longer than the abuse itself. In his essay, Lopez says that he thought the act of abuse would be the most horrific, when it was, quote, the endearing horror that he had learned to accommodate brutalization. Through his experience in his story, Lopez said that he was able to empathize with another person's nightmare. He told Gross, quote, in order to write about it in the way I thought I had to, which is in the end, it's not about me, it's about us. On the NPR internet page for Lopez's interview, there are over 100 comments in reply, one of which states, so grateful for this man and his courage to tell a too common story. Many of the comments exclaimed thank you to Lopez, and I'm sure many more were said by readers that didn't comment. This is one of the many examples of how Lopez lives a life of service. The Sowell family collection is housed here at Texas Tech University. It is an assemblage of papers, manuscripts, and more about several natural world writers. Within the collection are journals, pictures, correspondence, and other objects that follow Lopez's life. In a draft for a speech for the Oregon Book Awards in 1997, Lopez wrote about a meeting he had in Australia with several writers around the world. Quote, we were all concerned for the fate of the reader, and none of us felt that we were authorities on anything except having our own experience and our vision of that experience. Our common question seemed to be, how can we help? The focus of the group was centered on the writers, quote, trying to define the nature of community in the wake of destruction brought by colonialism and in the face of what might be called hypercapitalism, unquote. Lopez actively takes the writer's role in society into account by writing stories to benefit people he knows and also the ones he will never meet in communities around the world. He says that modern capitalism has, quote, an emphasis on separating the individual consumer from the inclusive structure of the family. Lopez writes to connect parts of unraveling communities together around the world through their shared experiences. He strives to know how he can make an individual not feel stripped of dignity and a sense of self-worth. Lopez offers people stories about incredible and terrible experiences without them ever having to live through it in an effort to help them. As a writer, he seeks to write about an event so a reader can feel like they are experiencing it firsthand, to learn what other people go through or that they're not alone in their experiences. He has a gift that, as he says, can't be taught because no one has the power to change the reason why a person writes. A writer can either understand that a story is the authority or falsely assume that they have the authority to change details to make their own story instead of a real one. His beliefs to leave authority with the story and bring together communities reinforce and guide his pursuits of helping others. Reading Lopez's stories, I'm emotionally invested in the landscapes and the characters he recounts or creates. His stories make me feel vulnerable, even though I've never lived through the same event as him or his characters. As I read, I feel an intimate connection, like I'm walking with a close friend or remembering a fond memory. Like Lopez, I want to be able to write about my life in a way to help other people feel that they're not alone. Barry Lopez uses his valuable talents as a writer to live a life of service for his readers. Thank you.
Okay, my name is Aaron Carver, and I changed the title of my essay. I'm going to be reading Landscape and Truth Considerations of Barry Lopez's Outside. William Tiedemann, author of Conversations with Barry Lopez, once walked with Lopez through Texas Tech's National Ranching Heritage Center Museum. After 15 minutes of speaking to Lopez, Tiedemann realized that Lopez was walking in silence. Lopez's demeanor startled him, and he was taken aback by the intensity of Lopez's gaze. Tiedemann recalls that Lopez was seeing things that he didn't. Lopez had mastered the, quote, silence and focus that characterize indigenous ways of seeing. I think Lopez was allowing the artifacts to tell him about the world in which they once lived, instead of imposing descriptions upon them based on today's world. That leaves me wondering, what did Lopez want them to say? In December 2015, I traveled to Argentina to work for a month on a small farm in the mountains of Patagonia. An 11-hour flight from Texas to Buenos Aires was followed by a 22-hour bus ride across Argentina. On the bus, I enjoyed my view of the central Argentine plains that reached the horizon in all directions with that little of anything between the ground and sky. I felt anxious, exhausted, and excited, but my mind was comfortable. In this landscape, my usually crowded thoughts were at peace in the expanse of nature. We arrived at San Martin in the Andes. There I met Gaston, the farm owner, who drove me to his farm. I planted trees, dug irrigation trenches, laid gravel walkways, hiked, swam with trout, and drank straight from the streams. I was getting to know the famed mountains of Patagonia. But these mountains did not yet know me. In my mind, I introduced myself by listing my GPA, scholarships, work experiences and reference letters, organizational affiliations, estimates of the numbers on my tax forms, the prestige of my employers and future opportunities, and just how much progress I was making in my life. Many dozens of hours of this chatter passed. Then I heard the mountains silence. I saw their gaze directly on me, and with the focus so raw it was unbearable at first. Lopez's focus allows him to see the, quote, varied set of profound ethical relationships between a person and various components of the physical landscape in which that person finds himself or herself. When Lopez thinks of a person, he seeks to understand their landscape. He began by studying his own landscape with his book, Desert Notes. Lopez chose to write fiction to express emotional truth rather than the factual truth of nonfiction. Lopez says that, quote, human cultures need both of these truths. Everything is held together by stories, Lopez says, and the purest stories are fiction. The facts are removed to leave just the emotional truths expressed through narrative. Lopez's first book, Desert Notes, was a result of Lopez's realization that a landscape can reinforce a narrative. This is the power of landscape. It can provide a framework for emotional truth. Under the mountain's gaze in Argentina, I stood still. What did the mountains see, I thought? They saw 100 million years into the past and 100 million more into the future. They saw the heights of the world and the heat waves of summer and the flutter of songbirds and the meandering of 1,000 score of cattle. And they saw me, differently than I did. The mountains remained still, silent, unflinching. They weren't angry, only sincere. The mountains watched me until I stopped hiding behind a GPA, a tailored suit, a Fortune 500 job, political significance, honor societies, or awards. They stood silent through all my excuses. I can't do something for the world. I'm not Bill Gates. I don't know how to help the world. There's shittier people than me anyways, right? It took me 15 days to stop bragging, rationalizing, and making excuses. The mountains asked me to describe myself in terms of the components of their landscape. Food, trees, rivers, small shelters, and a few people, the essentials. I had tried to hide in many places. Behind the seal of my university, I'm smart. Behind the massive companies I work for, we're innovative. Behind the mahogany facade of the political office I worked in, we're important. Behind the future cash flow of a career in engineering, I'll be rich. The mountains ignored these attempts to define myself. The mountains only saw me as a human being. I adjusted my view to match theirs. I looked at myself, asking the most human of questions. Who do you love? Are you helping the world? What are you afraid of? When Lopez sees a landscape, he seeks to understand its people. When Lopez became a visiting scholar at Texas Tech, he immediately sought to understand the university's relationship with the Comanche people who used to live on the Llano Estacado. Hearing the stories of the 1,100 Comanche horses slaughtered by Americans in the late 1800s, Lopez felt an urge to make amends for the tragic affair. A ceremony of conciliation was arranged in which clay and bones collected from the canyon were made into clay pots and pitchers. They were used to pour water during the ceremony at the Comanche Nation headquarters, signifying a relationship between Comanches and Texans. Bill Tiedemann, president of this ceremony, recalls the, quote, rapt attention of the Comanche women. He says that the horses were even transfixed on the ceremony. Lopez said that without the cameras and crowds present at the ceremony, he would have simply sat on the corral fence to be present with those horses. Barry Lopez begins his book outside with this offer, quote, I know you are tired. I am tired too. Will you walk along the edge of the desert with me? I would like to show you what lies before us. End quote. Yes, Barry, I am tired. I'm the tired that doesn't come from a lack of sleep or from hard exercise or from a passionate debate or from a fight with illness or from a long day in the sun. I'm the tired like after 1,000 days of mindlessly shuffling papers. Maybe they've crept all the way into my bones, replacing the marrow with PowerPoint templates and spreadsheet grids. I'm the kind of tired like when the occasional acute fear of bears our ancestors held is replaced with today's chronic fear of bear markets. I'm the kind of tired like I've been sitting inside solving all my problems by choosing to avoid them. Yes, Barry, I'm emotionally tired. Working with me on the farm were a few other travelers. One, a 29-year-old Italian woman, was spending a year traveling the world. She spoke 6 languages, owned no cell phone, and could work all day almost tirelessly. One afternoon, she told me of a family she had met whose furniture faced their television. How strange it was, she recalled. Do they care more to watch television than to talk with their family? Too embarrassed to admit the layout of my own home, I simply shook my head to match her bewilderment. Maybe sometime I should sit on the couch and just be present with my roommates. There can be a negative power to landscape. What I found in my landscape was that I have been hiding behind making money and gaining prestige. The components of developed landscapes often reinforce false and shallow narratives. When the tallest skyscraper is replaced with one taller every 10 years, infinite progress is the message. When a university is built on the pillaged site of an old community but has no recollection of the peoples, the message is clear. Those people didn't matter. When we take home trophies and drive nice cars and live on the good part of town, the message is, we are good people. That behavior can confuse us into exempting ourselves from even asking the question, are we good people? My first internship was with the United States Congress in Washington, D.C. I hopped from politics to big oil, working 3 summers digging very, very expensive holes. I graduated in May 2016 with a chemical engineering degree. I had myriad opportunities to take a high-paying job after graduation. But if I'm being honest, money is not the main character I need in my life right now. Lopez often uses, quote, what happens to people when something outside the self comes into play, unquote, to develop the protagonist of his stories. I have carefully chosen the next 2 characters of my life. The first is an urban neighborhood, next is the rest of the world. In an urban neighborhood, young people often grow up with a message that they can't be successful, that violence is okay, that addiction is normal. I'll be a high school science teacher in Houston for 2 years at a low-income public charter school with Teach for America. I joined because I believe that we should create a new narrative in low-income communities. But I had not admitted to myself that I was lying. I had not admitted that I was lying to myself with my own narrative. Prestige, money, importance, those are not what make a life meaningful. So the first of the characters I'm bringing to my life is an urban community by serving as a teacher. The next is the rest of the world. On my teacher salary, I want to put away enough during 2 years of work to spend 2 years roaming the world, working in exchange for room and meals. That amounts to about $15,000. My plan starts with making my rent minimal. I'm building a 5x8 teardrop trailer to live in for the next 2 years. With a $2,500 budget, it's a thrifty endeavor, especially for a former big oil guy who once lived in a Houston apartment with a rent of $2,500. When I told a traveling companion from Argentina my trailer plan, he said it was really interesting and a great project. When I told my friend Ryan, who starts at ExxonMobil this summer, he said, why the heck would you do that? It's so small, you can't even stand up inside. I responded, I have a whole world to stand up in. All I've got to do is go outside. To me, a 5x8 trailer sounds plenty large, but living in just one nation is unbearably confining. I honestly don't have all this stuff figured out yet. What I can say is I have made progress, and I have a little test in mind. I'd like to make South America the last stop on my tour of the world and return again to the same mountains in Patagonia. I'd like to stand there and wait and listen to how I reintroduce myself and see if I've grown up enough to tell the truth. Barry Lopez, the writer, is one of a kind. Barry Lopez, the man, he's one of a kind too. Lopez's ability to see the relationships between place and person has led him to answer deep questions about himself and his contribution to the world. But ultimately, Barry Lopez is a human. In that way, he's like all of us. We all have a relationship with our landscape. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Emma. I am a junior studying biology, and I actually changed my title too. It's now Cheapening a Landscape, How Barry Lopez Doesn't Do It. Okay. I'm a young writer. Writing about place is important to me. I want to be able to write stories after exploring landscapes, but I often find that when I write about the natural world, my words cheapen the place. Descriptors like beautiful and glorious and grand feel empty. How do I write about a place that is beautiful and glorious and grand without using these words? I want my writing to invite my reader alongside me, to show them what I see. When I'm older and my memory is fading, I want my stories to bring me back to places I once explored. On a spring weekend just weeks ago, I spent 3 days hiking by myself in the Grand Canyon. I've never been there before, and I had a free weekend, so I went. One morning, I woke at 3 and hiked down the South Kaibab Trail from the rim. It took me 4 hours. When I made it to the bank of the Colorado River at last, I pulled out my old black moleskin journal and tried to write what I had seen. It's so vast, I wrote. No. The Grand Canyon's vastness, no. How beautiful, how glorious, how grand the Grand Canyon, definitely no. I closed my journal and lay back into the sand. Frustration welled up inside me because I was disappointed in the lack of depth and honesty in my words. It was late morning, and light fell over the walls around me and on the water, and it glowed. I got up and went to the water and dipped my hands in it. I washed my face. I watched an eddy. Once I was clean, I sat cross-legged in the sand and scanned the walls of the canyon wall across the river from me. After a while, maybe an hour or so, I lifted my sore body from the sand and began to walk back up to the rim. A few days later, after returning to my home in Texas, I picked up a collection of stories by Barry Lopez called Outside, and read the story Imperia's Tapestry. In the story, a woman named Impera weaves a scene of the Grand Canyon into a tapestry. She reminisces of the first time she saw the canyon, and says, "I never forgot its breadth, how delicate the colors of the rocks in the sky and the trees that were hung in it. I wanted to fill that space up, to be inside it like a bird, graceful, rising, falling, flying long winding spirals from the rim down to a landing far below." Here, in these sentences, Lopez shows us the depth and detail and openness of the Grand Canyon. Whereas I had written about surface details using descriptors, Lopez encouraged the reader into the landscape by writing about what it would feel to be there. Lopez, the author of many books and stories and winner of the National Book Award for Nonfiction, is a master of writing about places. That collection of short stories of his, Outside, is an example of this mastery. Using the stories from Outside and his papers from the Sowell collection here, I have found 3 things that Lopez does in his writing about landscapes that doesn't cheapen them, but honors them. I want to use these 3 things to become a better writer myself and stop cheapening places. So here they are. Lopez is honest, he takes himself out of the center of his writing, and he writes clear sentences. Number 1, Lopez is honest. Barry Lopez goes to places and studies them and writes about them. He does his research. In his fiction, Lopez writes characters with stories that he has imagined, but the landscapes he places them in are real, mapped out, true, or otherwise created from experience. Lopez also writes nonfiction. His book Arctic Dreams is a study of Arctic, its natural history and indigenous people, and the story of its land. Years of research and traveling the Arctic went into this book. In it, he asks and explores the questions: how do people imagine the landscapes they find themselves in? How does the land shape the imaginations of the people who dwell in it? How does desire itself, the desire to comprehend, shape knowledge? Lopez asks questions about landscapes and people and answers them with his stories. Another book by Lopez called Crossing Open Ground includes the essay Landscape and Narrative. In it, he writes, quote, "Every storyteller falls short of a perfect limning of a landscape. Perception and language both fail. But to make up something that is not there, something that which can never be corroborated in the land, is to knowingly set forth a false relationship, is to be lying, no longer telling a story." End quote. As a young writer, I'm challenged with putting my perception onto paper. My language fails a landscape. Rather than writing what I see, I embellish. And when I try to write from a place that is not from my own perception, I fail to be honest. And that's how I do it, how I cheapen a landscape. But Barry Lopez doesn't do it. Number 2, Lopez takes himself out of the center of his writing. And I mean both in his fiction and nonfiction. The story and the reader are more important to Lopez than himself. His motive isn't to show his readers how smart he is, although he's pretty darn smart. He gives them what they need, a story. In the fall of 2014, Lopez visited one of my writing classes here at Texas Tech. He sat on a stool toward the front of the room and spoke about his life, his writing, the places he had been. I remember he said something about how when he writes a story, he takes the hand of the reader and guides them through it. And then, once it's time, he lets go, places his hand on the reader's back, and gently releases them into the story, the place. The story Desert Notes in Outside is an embodiment of this analogy. The story begins, quote, "I know you are tired. I am tired too. Will you walk along the edge of the desert with me? I would like to show you what is before us." End quote. Lopez brings the reader along with him in Desert Notes, showing rattlesnakes and rocks and stillness and silence. Then he quietly leaves. In the closing paragraph, Lopez writes, quote, I will leave you alone to look out on the desert. What makes you want to leave now is what is trying to kill you. Have the patience to wait until the rattlesnake kills itself. Others may tell you that this has already happened, and this may be true, but wait until you see for yourself, until you are sure." End quote. This is classic Barry Lopez. He makes his presence known, guides us, and then leaves us in the story to explore it ourselves. A good friend of mine once had dinner with Lopez and wrote to me about it. He wrote, quote, "There is an intensity to Barry, as if he has struck the rock and is drinking the spring dry. Only the spring is you, the moment, the story." My friend loved that Lopez tells stories to keep storytelling alive and to bring people joy and perspective. In Lopez fiction, his narrators show the reader what is to be seen. Here's an example from the story Twilight, which details the history of the Navajo rug as it passes from one owner to another. Lopez writes, quote, "I see the woman who smells like sagebrush and her 3 children with large wide eyes and tattered leggings. I see the boy who rolls in dust like a horse and the legionnaire with the alabaster skin polished smooth by the wind. I see the magnificent Jethro loping across the desert like a greyhound with his arms full of oars." End quote. These sentences all start with I, but not a single one is about Lopez. They're about what he wants us to see with him. And that's how Barry Lopez doesn't do it. Number 3, Lopez writes clear sentences. Some of them are simple. Some of them are long and detailed and have a lot of commas, but each sentence he writes has a clear direction and meaning. Because you can understand his sentences, you can better understand the landscape Lopez wants to show you. His language brings the landscape closer, within grasp. Here's a passage from his story, The Falls. "When we came through Stanley Basin in Idaho, we crossed over a little bridge where the Salmon River was only a foot deep, 10 feet across. It came across a big meadow, out of some quaking aspen. 'Let's go up there,' he said. 'I bet that's good water.' We did. We camped up in those aspen, and that was good water. It was sweet like a woman's lips when you are in love and holding back." Lopez writes what he means. Salmon River was shallow at the bridge. The water was good and sweet. Clear sentences let the story come through. I struggle with this because I try to make my sentences pretty rather than clear. Lopez's stories are powerful because he just writes clear sentences. And that's how Barry Lopez doesn't do it. Well, Barry Lopez has a few years on me. He has traveled the globe, studying landscapes on every continent. He writes a lot. With time and experience and learning from masters like Lopez, my writing will mature and it will stop being cheap. Writing is powerful as it documents and honors landscapes and people and stories. And story is powerful because, as Lopez once said in an interview, everything is held together with stories. If this is true in everything, the whole universe is held together with stories, then I better focus on these three things. I'll be honest, I will take myself out of the center of my writing, and I will write clear sentences. Thank you for listening.